I'm here today with Blair Tyndall, and Blair has agreed to talk to us about, first of all, I contacted her when she talked about an experience she had in a bathroom, which I think is really important because so often we're told that our concerns about having biological males in restrooms are not valid. And so I wanted to explore that with Blair and then just kind of see where the conversation goes. Before we get into that, Blair, you wanted to show us what you do for a living.
Okay, believe it or not, I play the oboe for a living. So it looks a lot like a clarinet, and people often mistake it because it's a woodwind family for the bassoon, which is the big bedpost looking thing. So here's what it sounds like. And then we have a bunch of different sizes. This is a
Oh,
larger
wow.
one. And lest you think that this is really obscure, I Got You Babe, Cher, huge oboe solo. You can hear me every day on NPR. I'm the theme music for Performance Today.
Oh, nice. With Fred Childs.
I'm on Malcolm X, all the Spike Lee films. I played in the New York Philharmonic on Broadway for 15 years. So I'm obviously a performing artist who is not unacquainted with the LGB. We're going to leave it at LGB.
Yes.
Community.
And I've always really appreciated the oboe because it has that deepness that I tend to prefer those deep tones more than the high notes.
Well, people describe it as, and the cello as being the closest to the human voice when singing.
Oh, interesting. See,
Yeah.
all I ever played was the recorder.
Close enough. Well, we all had to do that in junior high school or elementary school, the tonettes and stuff.
Although I did play the accordion for a short time before. What happened with the accordion is that I got to the point where the accordion needed to grow, but I wasn't growing. And so it just didn't work out very well. Well, Blair, do you want to just kind of give us an overview of what happened to you and why it is that it was concerning and why you wanted to share what happened?
Yeah, so I wanted to differentiate my experience from what we often hear from your wonderful interviews from parents who are concerned about underage girls, for the most part, undergoing irreparable surgical damage. So this is not that. I've never been married, and I'm just a single girl. So don't have any kids that I know of. I think I would know. And I have been concerned about this, and I'm not unacquainted with transgender people at all. I'm a performing artist. So this was 2017, I believe. I was in a restaurant, a very lovely, large, bustling restaurant in Marina del Rey, California, called Killer Shrimp, which is a great name. And Killer Shrimp has two bathrooms, men's room, ladies' room. They don't have a single occupancy stall. So both bathrooms, I have not been a men's room, by the way, but both bathrooms, as I understand, have two stalls. So it's, as we say in the South, where I'm from, it's not a one-seater. So I was in there on a really busy night, and there were 6 women waiting for the 2 stalls. And so we were, one of the people waiting was not a woman. It was a 10 to 12-year-old girl who was probably there with a birthday party or her father or something, certainly old enough to go into the bathroom by herself. So that's not an issue. There were 2 trans-identified males in sort of leggings and tight clothing, very made up. And they were grinding up against each other on the wall, sort of having sex. At least one of them had his hoo-ha out. And so this is obviously not appropriate under any circumstances, but especially not in front of a 10 to 12-year-old little girl. And even if she hadn't been there, I would have said something because that's just the way I am. So I went right up to him and I said, this is a waterfront beachfront place. I said, take it out on the beach. We don't want to see this, because it was obviously an exhibitionist thing so that they could get their rocks off, having us watch them and being too afraid to say anything. Well, I'm never too afraid to say anything. One of them came roaring after me, and because this was around the corner from me, I knew which direction the bathroom door opened in as you're entering, so I knew how to slam it on his hand. And I just raced out into the parking lot, and wow, he followed me in a very violent way. He did not touch me, but it was terrifying. And that is what's going on with the bathroom issue, and I really have a problem with it. You know, I'm happy to use a single stall if it's available, but I had to go, and so we were in there.
Well, and I think that your story illustrates something that we keep hearing. Oh, that never happens. That you know, the males who identify as women only want to use the restroom. That's all they want to do is go in and pee. And I think those of us who have seen trans-identified men in women's bathrooms know that's not true. And I had an experience where I was actually up at the state capitol, and I was kind of lobbying to try to get them to ban puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for minors. And I was in the bathroom changing, and all the stalls were taken up, so I had to change in the open area. And I turned around, and there was a man watching me, a man who said that he claimed to feel like a woman. And it was incredibly uncomfortable for me. And not for him. It was clear that it was not uncomfortable for him. And so I think your story and others like it illustrate that this narrative that these, you know, these poor men who identify as women, all they want to do is pee.
Yes, and I have to say, I had a very uncomfortable altercation that I think has now been resolved with somebody. I played in Broadway orchestras for 20 years. And it was somebody who was somebody I very much respect professionally. And he and his husband have now adopted a very lovely, adorable little girl I love seeing on social media. But he put together, when this whole thing started, the show was Kinky Boots, a whole sort of PSA about we just want to pee. And nobody asks us if we're uncomfortable. And then when you look on social media, you see so many comments about trans-identified males claiming that women are attacking them and they want to punch us and hurt us. And really, I don't, fortunately, because of the pandemic, one good thing is we don't really need to use public restrooms, but in the rare event that you do, you know, I definitely try to plan ahead and make sure it's a single room. And to add insult to injury to all of this was, I'm just going to let her rip because it's going to be in a book pretty soon anyway. My paternal grandfather abused me sexually from my earliest memory. And my mother and father, my mother was a legendary drunk, and I really don't blame her for it because she was very, very brilliant and frustrated. They would take my dementia-ridden grandmother out with my brother and my dad for a ride and leave him alone in the house with me. Why nobody thought that was a bad idea, I don't know. So by the time I was 6 or 7, I figured out to lock myself in the bathroom. So at that point, the bathroom was a safe haven. And now it's not, which is so ironic. So I ended up figuring out, I'm Southern, and there's a magnolia tree in the front yard. So I ended up figuring out the second I heard the car start up, I would get up that magnolia tree, and he never found me. But, you know, we have to do certain things in the bathroom, like change tampons, and like guys take a dump, do all the usual things. But the tampon thing, especially with pantyhose or tights, if you're in a colder climate, it takes time, and you're in a very compromised position. And we see all the time men are holding cameras up underneath. And when I, you know, tell my story of this event at Killer Shrimp, people say, well, those weren't really trans people. Like, well, is there like a membership card? How would I check?
Well, and
You
and
know,
that is the crux of the argument that just drives me crazy, is that they say, well, somebody who did that isn't really a trans woman. But the point is that we now have it so that any man can claim to be a woman and have access to spaces where women are vulnerable. And there isn't a litmus test. They don't have to show that they've had their penis cut off. They don't have to show that they've been taken hormones. They don't even, these days, they can even have a beard, because I hear this argument now that transgender women shouldn't have to conform to stereotypes of womanhood, which is, it's just this, like, everything keeps getting turned on its head. And so I've seen pictures of men with full beards who are upset about being harassed about going into women's bathrooms because they identify as women, even though they're gender nonconforming women.
well, and I mean, nothing is a monolith. I have a journalism degree in addition to my being a musician. Nothing is a monolith. We learned in journalism school. So, every category of human being has, variations, like women and men and transgender, trans identified people. So you can't always say, it's this one thing or the other thing. But this is making us feel incredibly uncomfortable and unsafe. And in my case, I was definitely going to get attacked if I hadn't gotten to the right people in time. So I'm really happy to recognize people identifying in the way that makes them happiest. But when it starts to affect other people's rights, then I have a huge problem with it. And so it's not just this, but it's, of course, the transgender sports, which eats into women's scholarships, and how anybody can think anatomically intact men competing against women in sports is remotely fair is just beyond me.
Yeah, and that is where I just feel like over and over again we're having men's feelings, men's desires overriding women's rights and protections. And if you're a marginal male athlete, you can identify as a woman and be a superior athlete competing against women. And if you're a pedophile or a predator who wants access to vulnerable children and girls and women, then you can identify as a woman and get access to women's spaces. And it just seems to me absurd that if we call it out, we're labeled as haters or transphobes or bigots or even Nazis, and threatened, like you said. I've been threatened with physical violence. A lot of those of us who are speaking out get people suggest we should be raped or gagged with their girl dick. And so this is, to me, really violence against women that has been almost celebrated by people, and it's incredibly confusing.
And the most frustrating thing is so many women are signing up for this.
Yeah. And I think about your situation where, like so many women, you were sexually abused or sexually assaulted. And so many women have these issues. And yet now we're not allowed to object to having penises in spaces where we're vulnerable. When it was the penises that hurt us often, and I hear people say that trans men are women, or trans identified women are women, but they're not. And it just drives me crazy that it's sort of like we're supposed to accept misogyny and fantasy and the feelings of these men who have nefarious intentions towards us.
I think you meant to say trans-identified males. Not
Probably. Yeah.
But I think that's an important thing, because when you start using the term women, and I will never accept the term cis, because that's ludicrous. I got my horrible period at 11 years old, and when I was giving a piano recital in a fluffy white dress, and, men will never know what that feels like. It was horrible.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I'm using the terms trans-identified males and trans-identified females, and I'm happy to, you know, respect their lifestyles, any individual's lifestyle. So I do have to say, I've had 3 fairly significant trans-identified male situations, which was the first of which was somebody I went to music conservatory with, really fine pianist. I am not going to say this person's name, but let's just call this person Sam, because that can be male or female. So Sam was one of the very earliest adopters of the surgery. So Sam went to Thailand, did it. We're still very good friends. In fact, this person just gave me advice on buying a piano. This is a very high level, anybody who's in classical music will know who this is. Sam liked Asian women before, Sam likes Asian women now. And it's fine. And we've had discussions about this, and Sam doesn't want to make women feel uncomfortable in any way, but this is something that makes him happy, her happy, makes Sam happy. So I'm with that all the way. And Sam does not want to make us uncomfortable or invade our spaces in the least. Then when I was doing Miss Saigon on Broadway, there was the most unlikely trans-identified male, burly masculine stagehand who went through the surgery and did it, but he would not go in the ladies' room. And remember, Broadway theaters, the backstage, it's very cramped area. So this person, and I don't remember his name, did not invade our spaces, probably because we take much longer in the bathroom. So there was that. And then early on when I came to LA, so I'm gonna just be out with it now because I don't care. I wrote a book called Mozart in the Jungle that was made into an award-winning TV show. So when I got out here, I thought, well, let's learn some more about the business. So I got an internship at a really wonderful production company that was starting to produce The Danish Girl, about the first known trans-identified male. So I worked on it for a little while at the very beginning, not at the end, but it's not like I'm unfamiliar with any of this. I would say quite a hefty percentage of people with whom I work in music, entertainment, TV, the TV show Mozart in the Jungle was a huge deal. I'm completely comfortable with all that. So it's not as if I'm some weird ultra-religious TERF or something. Yeah, I am a TERF.
Well, and that's the thing that I think is important, that I'm very disappointed about the trajectory of the trans movement, because I see it as an opportunity for men who like to wear dresses to start asserting themselves in the men's bathroom and saying, we are men who are gender nonconforming and we have a right to go into the men's bathroom. Or we are men who have gone through a sex change operation, but we're still biological males and we belong in men's bathrooms. And to me, it sort of presents an amazing opportunity to push into those spaces where I think this could be a time when we say, okay, guys, you need to start accepting that they're gender nonconforming men. But instead, what's happened is that we have men now who are pushing into women's spaces. They say they're uncomfortable in the men's spaces, therefore they should come into women's spaces. Well, if they're uncomfortable in the men's spaces, can't they imagine how we must feel with them coming into our spaces?
Exactly, and that's very astute. And so much of this transgender ideology is based on the 1950s stereotypes that women my age, I'm 60, I was born in 1960 when we couldn't get a car loan or a credit card, we could barely vote. It's based on, we're supposed to be just stupid and don't do math and like pink and sparkly things. That's never been me, and I worked my whole life to get this far and have an award-winning TV show and a very good music career. I'm not some stupid, giggly person, and I see it all the time. Like whenever somebody I did have an interesting event the last couple of days. There was a prowler, and I'm very well protected because I'm no dumb bunny. So I had the alarm on and everything, but the sheriff came over, and I could see it was a male and a female sheriff, and they were like, how did a single girl afford all this? And I could see the cartoon bubble. There must have been a man there. No, my mother made me believe in myself, and this is what happened. And then, I've given at least 800 musicians jobs off the show, and so many other people too. But it is really frustrating to have this back dialed 50 years to when I was under 10 years old. We have to start all over again.
Well, and the idea that somehow wearing makeup and a wig and a dress makes you suddenly a woman. Well, that's just incredibly insulting.
Yeah, and apparently, I live in West Hollywood, which is, a very, we'll say, progressive community. And I lived down the street from a drag bar. So I did go a couple of times to see what it was about. It's not my thing, but if it's somebody else's thing, no problem, go enjoy it. But the thing that really disturbed me was they have bingo night, which is really fun, actually. But then whoever wins bingo night, and it seems to mostly be women, have to go up on stage and get violently, brutally paddled by these drag queens. And the girls seem to like it. And I'm just like, what is going on here?
That's bizarre.
It really is. No, I've got videos of it.
That's really bizarre.
Really strange. Women seem to just like this stuff.
And that maybe, I mean, you and I are similar ages. And I think that is sort of what I'm seeing too, is that I am so confused how so-called feminists are embracing this ideology and saying, of course they're women. Come on, be feminists. If your feminism doesn't include trans women, then you're not really a feminist. And it's, the only thing that I can think of is that younger women didn't have to fight for those spaces. I mean, I remember as a kid hearing stories about, the first woman firefighter who had to fight to get a locker room. And, I remember women who had to fight to get bathrooms because there weren't bathrooms in their workplace. Even Congress, they had to fight to get bathrooms close to the chambers because when they built the Capitol, it never occurred to them that women would ever be legislators. And so we had to fight for our spaces. We had to fight for scholarships. We had to fight for women's sports. And it's almost like the younger generation has no concept of that fight. And so they take it for granted and they don't realize what it's like to have those spaces violated and taken away.
And just feel so incredibly unsafe.
Yes. I mean, the fact that you approached those two transgender people who were behaving so inappropriately and called them out, you could have been hurt.
I would have been hurt, but I was so familiar with the space and I could tell. In New York, we call this the bridge and tunnel crowd. Like the people, sorry, New Jerseyans, I lived in New Jersey too, but the people who come over for one night of fun in New York. So this is what Marina Del Rey, this particular restaurant, does attract a lot of the bridge and tunnel crowd, like from the Valley and stuff. They totally the Valley. And these were two of those guys. I knew this restaurant because I went there all the time. It was around the corner. So I knew I could get out quickly, and I knew that my saying something was going to end it. So I just did, and I thought of running in the kitchen, but the door might have been locked, so I ran out to the parking valet, and they protected me.
So in what way did they protect you? Did both the guys run after you, or just the one?
Just one. I don't know what happened to the other guy.
And what did the valet do?
So the valet, of course, there's this woman running out and saying, please help me. And they don't know what's going on. And they're not, I mean, I was, when I was really broke, I was a valet parking person too. So, they knew me, they recognized me, and they both just sort of came together, and I stood behind them, and one of them got on the phone. So, and we did call the sheriff, but the sheriff never came.
But that's really scary, because if you had been in a different situation where there weren't people there to protect you,
I wouldn't have done it.
well, so you wouldn't have felt safe enough to call them out. And
These were
so,
enormous.
and that is one of the things that's so frustrating. And I've had the experience too, that I'm a small woman, and for me to call someone out, if another woman's behaving inappropriately, even, it's difficult for me because I'm small. But especially if a man is doing something, and in that case, I just, the fact that they were behaving like that in front of a child, I just find so incredibly disturbing, that they're to the point where they feel so entitled to our spaces, and they have no qualms about exhibitionism like that.
But I don't think they were counting on somebody who goes there regularly, and the whole staff knew me. So I would not have done it were that not the case. But it just made me so angry, and it was not fair to this little girl or to
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, and I feel so sad for kids these days in schools, for little girls these days in schools who are told that they have no choice but to have biological males in their restrooms and locker rooms and other spaces, and they're being told they don't have a right to say no.
So do you remember what it was like the first time somebody coached you to put in a tampon? There's no way. I mean, you can get a mirror and stuff, but either your mother or a girlfriend is in the stall next to you and talking you through it. Imagine being 10 or 11 or 12 years old in a school bathroom and having some boy recording the whole conversation and laughing at you. It's just so not cool. I don't even know where to start.
Well, and it's interesting because there was a school in the UK where they started allowing boys to go into the girls' bathrooms. I think they just decided to have gender neutral bathrooms to sort of deal with this new craze. And girls started getting bladder infections, and they started to want to stay
Right.
home when they were having their periods. And I'm like, how regressive is it that we're going to entitle these men to to come into our spaces, and then girls are staying home when they're menstruating like they used to do? Are we going to go into, are we going to have to like have menstruating huts, for, it's just, I just feel like, how in any way do we suggest that this is progress? And that's sort of how I feel, is that they're presenting this as, we're going progressive.
As you posited at the beginning of this statement, not just menstruating, but women are very prone to urinary tract infections. And indeed, I was and had to go through an incredibly painful procedure when I was 10 because my grandfather was abusing me sexually, which leads to bladder infections and also just not being able to urinate when you need to.
When you're yes, and yes, if you're uncomfortable.
Girls sick.
Yeah. And you also mentioned that women take longer in the bathroom. And so we also now have to compete with men to, with limited bathroom space.
Yeah.
So on so many levels, it's frustrating. And I'm not sure what the solution is, and how we convince people that we're not just bigots who are uncomfortable with gender nonconforming men.
Well, one other issue I wanted to point out, because I do live in a primarily gay neighborhood, mostly gay men, which is great, safe place. um, so this is not an issue at the moment because restaurants are closed, and tonight actually is the first night of the curfew in California, or in Los Angeles at least. But I, at least on 2 occasions, observed a man in a bar who is being coached by a transgender, how to be a woman coach, how to go into the bathroom with us and pass. And I just decided I would go home and go to the bathroom instead. I mean, it's just like, really? Can't we just have that?
Yeah, we just want our bathrooms, and we fought for them. I mean, I remember, when I was little, sometimes there weren't women's bathrooms. There'd be men's rooms, but not women's rooms in certain places of employment. And certainly there weren't the sports opportunities that there are now for girls. There aren't the scholarship opportunities that there are now. And those are
Title,
all going to go away.
but Title IX has been hijacked. It was meant to give us opportunities, and now it's meant to give men opportunities.
Just out of curiosity, I don't know if you talk to the men in your neighborhood much, but another concern that I have and many others have had is that a lot of boys who are effeminate are now being told that they're transgender, and girls who are butch are being told that they're transgender, and it almost seems like an effort to erase gays and lesbians.
Yeah, definitely. And, because I'm 60 and I live in this gated community full of gay men, um, I have talked to a lot of them about it, and they're not really on the wavelength. But I think the trans-identified male and trans-identified female differ in this way. As I was growing up, and my mother, it came out after my dad died and her defenses were down, was sexually abused as a very small child. Um, she sort of taught me to really stick up for myself. And so I saw that in terms of, I wish I were a man. So I can understand how these girls, especially when the whole stupid Disney princess thing comes up, would rather be powerful, and the way that they see that as being male. For guys, I'm not really sure where the attraction lies. I mean, if you want to take a 1/3% pay cut, be my guest.
Well, just my observations, and this is something that I would like to write about at some point, come up with a taxonomy of transgender, because I think there's this umbrella and everybody assumes that all transgender are the same. But as far as men who identify as women, I think there are some very big differences. And I think there are the autogynophiles who get sexually aroused at pretending to be women. And they're the ones who are saying trans women are women. They're the ones who are being really aggressive. Oftentimes it seems like they don't like women very much. And I see posts where they're bragging about being prettier than women, or they go in and get their chest surgery and they're like, my boobs are bigger than any other woman's. And, this is an autogynophile. But then there are men who I've heard who have been sexually assaulted, or for some reason just have an intense dislike for their penis, and they just want to get it cut off. And that's another category. And then I think that there are gay men who get teased for being effeminate, and they decide that it's going to be easier if they just decide to pass as women. And so I think, and that's very simplified, but I think that it's important that we clarify that there are, I think that the men that you ran into in the bathroom were autogynophiles for sure. They were getting their yayas out of dressing up as women, and also being able to be exhibitioning in front of you.
Well, I think it's important to point out that, to my knowledge, men in ladies' rooms, it's not legal here yet in California. You could correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I am not entirely sure what the laws are, because I think that oftentimes it's up to the establishment. Because I live in Utah, and I know in Utah we have Target stores, and Target stores have said that people can choose which bathroom they want to use based on how they identify. And we also have, I think it's Planet Fitness, which has the same policy. And so I'm not sure, I don't know if there are state rules that govern this. I know, or if it just depends on the business.
I'm not sure either. But I think where I was going with this is whether or not it's legal. Let's assume it's not legal. Women are so cowed into not saying anything and being nice, when our actual safety is at risk. And not to, I know so many nice men, so I'm certainly not dumping on men, but I am dumping on, once this stuff is legislated, then you can't argue with it. And then where are you supposed to go to the bathroom?
Yeah, and it really, I do understand that it might be very uncomfortable for a man who's dressed up as a woman to go into a men's room.
Me too.
I understand that. However, I don't think that that person then has the right to violate our spaces. I think that that's really an issue. First of all, they have a choice. We don't have a choice about being born women. We don't have any choice to not be women. They have a choice to present as women or not. So they're, in my mind, they're the ones who are assuming that identity and should have to live with the consequences of being uncomfortable going into a men's room rather than making us uncomfortable coming into our spaces.
Or, if this is a theme in one's life, how about choosing establishments that have one, as we say in the South, one holers?
Yeah. And that might be where we're headed at this point, because I'm to the point where I prefer establishments that have private restrooms, just because I don't know who might be walking in that door. I mean, when I was at the state capitol, I was flabbergasted that I was in there changing half naked and a man walked in and, clearly was quite pleased with himself.
Yeah.
And there was nothing I could do about it. I mean, I could have gone and complained, but I'm half naked, and that's also something that I think is really important, is that when men say all they do in the bathroom is pee, they don't understand women, because we do a whole lot more in the bathroom than just pee.
Indeed, we do. No, I'll never forget when I had just gotten my period, so it was 1971. If anybody is still alive from that era, and I was with a friend from music camp at Ocean City Beach in Maryland, and she and her friend were going to teach me to use a tampon if it was the last thing they did on earth. So they were in the two adjacent stalls, and like somebody had a compact mirror that it's complicated. You don't know what's down there. Imagine if there had been a teenage boy in the room. Oh my God, it would have been payday for him.
Yeah. Yeah. And even just, I mean, bodily functions. I think women are somewhat okay with normal bodily functions in front of other women, although there are those of us who might wait until there's nobody in the bathroom in order to express those bodily functions. But when you start having men in there, especially for teenage girls, this could be just incredibly uncomfortable.
It really would have been when I was that age, for sure. And these poor girls in middle school, I can't even begin to
Yeah, I
imagine.
can't even. I'm thinking back in middle school. Was about the worst time in my life. I absolutely was a miserable kid. And, if you compound that with, like, I remember the I guess they called it maturation class at the time when I was
Oh,
in 6th grade. And, it was all the girls went into one room and all the boys went into one room. And it was extremely uncomfortable as it was. If there had been boys in that classroom with us when we were getting that maturation speech, nobody would have asked any questions. And some of the girls who were in there had not been told anything by their parents about menstruating or, puberty. And it was really important that they get that information and be allowed to ask questions and be comfortable asking questions. But if there had been boys in there, those girls would have been so uncomfortable that they probably wouldn't have been able to pay attention in the first place. And they certainly wouldn't have asked questions.
well, I think that also brings up the issue that we're seeing that this is just some sort of vague issue, and that the vast majority of people don't realize that trans-identified males, don't have 80 to 90% of them have not been surgically altered. They're still guys.
Right. And one of the reasons they haven't been surgically altered is that they enjoy the affordances of their penis. It's not something they want to give up.
Well,
They're very, which means that in my mind, that they're men. I mean, it's just again, it's astonishing to me that we even have conversations like this. But the vast majority of men who claim to believe they feel like women are fully intact. erect and therefore are, physically bigger than us and also have a penis that can be used to assault
Yeah.
us.
So one thing, I know I originally said I wasn't going to talk about the show, but now I'm fine with it. So I wrote this memoir about my life called, which is what a memoir is, called Mozart in the Jungle, and it was made into a TV show, and we won the Golden Globe for Best Comedy and Best Actor in a Comedy. So one of the main places we shot was a university campus, State University of New York at Purchase. I'm using the royally they shot. I mean, they made the show. I just took the origin of it, and I love the show. But it was one of these rare European-style restrooms where it sinks, a communal sink area, and then individual stalls. So I wasn't privy to everything until I saw it all the time, even though I was the consultant. So at one point, the star of the show, Gael Garcia Bernal, had a line that he was given where he's kind of flirting with this really sexy cellist, and she comes out of one of the stalls, and she says, "You have to get out of here. It's the ladies' room." And he says something like, "Well, for now." I was on the phone right away with the director, and I said, "Do not go in this direction." And they didn't. So he has a young daughter and was trying to set a good example for her. So,
and that's what I think we really need men to do two things. We need men to stand up for women, and we also need men to say, hey, if men are wearing dresses, they get to come into the men's room because they're men regardless of what they're wearing.
right.
And make that a more inclusive space for men who are gender nonconforming. And so I think those are the two things that we really need to call on men to do.
And in my world, as a performing artist, which I've been for 45 years now, professionally, I don't know any man who would have a problem with that in my world.
Well, and that's the interesting thing is that I hear these trans-identified men who claim to believe they feel like they're women, talk about how scared they are going in the men's bathrooms, and yet I have never heard of a case where
They're going into women's bathrooms, like
yeah.
we're gonna.
And it's interesting because I've talked to Jen Smith is, he's a man who a transgender man, I guess, or a trans-identified man. And I've interviewed a couple of men who identify or dress up as women, whatever you want to call it, and use the men's rooms. And they've told me they get funny looks sometimes, but they've never gotten beaten up. They've never gotten, thrown out. And yet women get sexually assaulted in these spaces. We have prisons now where any man who claims to believe they're a woman, I believe in California now, gets to be put in with women prisoners. That's a situation where those women prisoners are now going to be vulnerable. And again, it makes no sense because a male prisoner can dress up like a woman if he wants to,
And quite a few of these female prisoners are in there because they were defending themselves against domestic violence, which brings us now to the situation of, the whining about so many trans murders. Okay, from what I can tell, and I do have a journalism degree from Stanford, so I know how to look these things up, there were 28 murders of trans-identified males last year. There were almost 2,000 murders, domestic violence murders of regular old plain vanilla women like us.
Right. And if you look at the demographics, the trans-identified, the men who claim to believe they were women who were killed, the trans-identified men tended to be sex workers, tended to be involved in drugs, or it tended to be domestic violence in which they were killed by their partners. And so again, we have the focus going on men who have been murdered, but all these women, as you said, are murdered every day, are raped every day, are assaulted every day, and the publicity isn't on them.
It's infuriating. And believe me, my heart goes out to these men who have been assaulted and murdered. But I mean, to bring this up as a primary um, issue, and it's so outrageous, is just not valid.
No, and it is, like you said, anytime someone gets brutalized, anytime anybody gets sexually assaulted or murdered, it's
Sure.
tragic, and we should be upset about it. But for them to use, for the trans movement to use that as justification for why people who identify as trans should be given special privileges just doesn't make sense at all.
And also, the suicide approach is ludicrous.
Yeah, and that I keep seeing this come up over and over and over again. And again, we have good data that shows that people who go through the sex change operation tend to have much higher rates of suicide. We don't have data on autogynophilic men. And I suspect their suicide rate's pretty low because they seem pretty comfortable with themselves.
That could be. I'm not up to speed on that.
Yeah, I have not seen any research, and it would be incredibly hard to actually do a study on autogynophilic men because, first of all, a lot of them don't admit that they're autogynophilic. They say they're women. So we have an issue with honesty here, and I think it would just be really hard to get good data on it.
One other thing that's one of the final things I can think of to bring up is that the whole, I hate to describe it as anti-trans because that's not at all how I feel, but women who have concerns about our safety in these women-only spaces when we are smaller and weaker, and also the whole sports and scholarship issue is, and our Women's Days and awards being hijacked is something else altogether. Um, I'm losing my train of thought, but where was I going with this?
It's interesting as you said that because it just occurred to me another area um, where women are being pushed out is in it's not just in sports, it's in like writing. We have book awards for women. Those are now being co-opted by men. We have, I'm sure in many of the arts we have special categories for women, and those are now being co-opted.
And also the whole, what has been so striking to me is the antipathy about J.K. Rowling, as has been discussed ad infinitum. She wrote a very eloquent and supportive essay about supporting transgender people and just sticking up for uh, the rights for women to reserve their private spaces. And so many people never read any of it and just kind of take this off the cuff and are trashing her, which is kind of hilarious because she's laughing all the way to the bank. I mean, she's pretty darn rich. And she made this by herself as a woman. She had this incredible accomplishment. And so my hat's off to her, but even I will not be more specific, but I have a young relative who's a Tim, a trans-identified male, and he's gone down that route too. And the whole woke thing and just glomming onto this movement at the expense of your own life sometimes.
One of the sad things that I see about the younger people who have bought into this ideology is that they're so self-absorbed and self-focused that it's almost like they don't have a sense of the world as a whole, and it makes me really sad because one of the things I hear is that trans medical care is medically necessary, it's life-saving, all this stuff, and I think about all the people around the world who are starving to death, and here we have what are really privileged kids insisting that they get these medical treatments that are going to cause them lifelong harm. And as a society, we've said, yes, we're going to give these to you. And if you want to talk about social justice, I can't think of anything that's more the antithesis of social justice than causing a healthy person to become medicalized for life on incredibly expensive medical treatments. while there are people who are starving in the world. That makes no sense to me.
Well, me too. And I am signed up with a really wonderful healthcare system here in California called Kaiser Permanente. So I did, out of curiosity, look into it. And yes, my premium payments are paying to have little girls' breasts cut off.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't mind a boob job.
Right. Right. And that is, I mean, this is cosmetic surgery that is, one group is more privileged because the insurance and Medicaid will pay for these surgeries. The insurance I have will pay for phalloplasty. It will not pay for me to have any other cosmetic surgery. If I wanted a fake penis, it would pay for me to have that, even though it's incredibly dangerous, likely to have lifelong complications. But if I want to have a boob job, if I want to have liposuction, if I want to have, a facelift or any other kind of cosmetic procedure, it won't be covered. Even if I am having the same amount of distress about my appearance as somebody who claims to be transgender is.
Yes, I agree. And that's been really frustrating to me. Fortunately, I did get sick with something that's now gone, but I reached my deductible. So I was like, wow, I can get stuff for free now. So I kind of get how wonderful that must feel to somebody in that position.
But it is, I don't know how you feel, but when I think about my insurance costs being higher than they need to be, because we're paying for elective cosmetic procedures that cause a healthy body to be less healthy, or to pay for, puberty blockers, which are incredibly expensive, or cross-sex hormones. It really bothers me that we are at a point where our insurance companies are paying for things that are not just not medically necessary, but actually harmful for one very specific segment of the population.
Well, I did actually bring this up with my internist, and I could tell he'd been coached, and he just shut down the conversation right away.
Interesting. Yeah. And a lot of doctors are afraid to say anything because they don't want the backlash that's going to happen.
Yeah, and their financial, they're going to get sued.
Yeah, it's very, so thank you for sharing your insights. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get a chance to cover?
Um, I just want to end it on a kind of positive note. Um, it seems, it's very easy to be regarded as somebody who's male bashing from this situation, but I was just going um, through my Facebook newsfeed, and I'm friends with all of these wonderful musicians who are male, and one really sticks out to me. So I've been a musician for a very long time. So I do know a few members of the, darn, where am I going with this? The big jazz family in New Orleans. So one of the cousins runs this fantastic jazz brass group. They're all trumpet players. And like half of his representatives are female trumpet players. I had no idea there were that many of them. And here is a guy who doesn't have to support women who is. So there are a lot of wonderful men who are looking out for us. And I think a lot of men, and also I'm gonna add this as well. I am in West Hollywood, which is a primarily gay community, mostly men, which is great. But I had a therapist here, and he brought up this, as we were finishing up. So I'm not seeing him anymore because I'm all healthy now. So I brought up the whole turf thing and that I am one, very gladly so. And he said, no, you're not a turf. And I said, yeah, I am. And I described the bathroom situation to him. And then he came up with this crazy thing that I don't think most people realize is a thing. He has a client who is assigned male at birth. but then he became a trans-identified male. But now, so he's now presenting himself as assigned female at birth and going after women as a, I just,
And actually, I have thought about that. I have thought about that as a way to sort of circumvent the insurance process. And I don't really want a breast job, but I was thinking if I said that I was an assigned male at birth who identified as a, no, wait, that I was, yeah, that I was a assigned male at birth, but I was trans identified, then they would pay for me to have a breast augmentation.
yeah, I think you're right.
And how convoluted does this get? I mean,
But he told me this crazy story of he was, so this guy, and I did catch a glimpse of him because he was after me at one session. So, and I immediately realized this is who it was. This is definitely a guy who was telling everybody that he's genetically female and has become a transgender man, a trans-identified. This is so confusing. But anyway, he was walking. So the story was he was walking down the street after a woman who seemed scared. And so she was clutching her keys, as we all do. And so instead of, any woman would have just let it go and walked behind this woman. No, he approached her and was on top of her, and she started running. I mean, no woman would ever do this. This was obviously a man, and in some weird Mobius strip of logic was identifying a man identifying as a woman, identifying as a man, protecting this woman that he was actually threatening.
oh
and I'm like,
ah!
I saw the guy, and I'm like, the next time I saw my therapist, I was like, that was the guy. You've got to be kidding.
Yeah, it's like Victor Victoria, this, it's this like, and it gets so convoluted. And ultimately it just is so silly because all of these are just social constructs about presenting as something. And biologically, no matter how much we want to be something we're not, we can't become something we're not, even if we try as hard as we can to look like that something.
Imagine how scared that woman was.
Yeah. I mean, and that's one of the things that, when I've had confrontations with men who claim to believe that they're women, it is really scary because I realize that in their mind, it would be okay for them to hit me or to, assault me, because in their mind, because they say that they identify as a woman, that it's no longer a man assaulting a woman. It would be a cat fight. And somehow that is, cat fights are cute and interesting.
You see all the time comments, because I do follow my young relative and his friends on social media. They think we're all like in the bathroom topless, pinching each other's nipples or something.
Yikes.
The tampon out.
Going to the right bathroom.
And also, I'm sorry about the brain fart earlier. This is embarrassing. I can remember the name. It's the Marsalis family.
Okay. Yeah.
So I've known Winton, but not well, but I've known him for a very long time. And so I recently got to know his cousin, Rodney. And Rodney was a Curtis graduate, very famous, fabulous music conservatory. And his brass ensemble is like half women, and they're all gorgeous. And this is, trumpet is the most masculine of instruments. So I'm just like, dude.
Yeah, and that's where, I think it is easy to be discouraged, but one thing that has given me so much hope for the future is running into women like you. 2 years ago, I thought I was the only one who was kind of going, what the heck is happening? But as I've started speaking out and reaching out, and it's like we're finding each other and realizing that there are a lot of us who are concerned. And there is a power in coming together and speaking out and saying, wait a minute, something's not right here, and we're not going to stand for it. And we're going to protect the children, and we're going to protect women.
Yeah. Some of the most frustrating parts of the thing with my young relative have been just encountering other members of our family and his mother's family. Well, now it's obvious who it is. But, anyway, the everybody else is just going with it, and the pronoun thing is just baffling to me, because when do you ever approach somebody and address them as he or she? You address them as hi or you or the name. So I'm unclear on, we all received this very strict set of directions of how to address this person, and I'm like, fine, I'm not interested. I'm not gonna.
Well, and it's really the only case I can think of where children are empowered to dictate to adults.
Which I
Kind,
understand.
yeah. And so it is, I mean, I can see why kids are attracted to it, who normally wouldn't be. If you're somebody who kind of is feeling a little bit left out, doesn't quite fit in, suddenly you can be part of this group that has a lot of power, that gets to dictate to other people how you're treated. And it really does make sense to me why the numbers are going up so fast.
And then my mother, his grandmother, well over the age of 90 at the time, was like, fine, hey, that's cool, you are. And he looked so disappointed.
Yeah, I bet. Well, and that's that. He's like, dang it, I wanted to be mad at her.
All his money, he didn't bother to come to the funeral. So
Yeah. Well, Blair, thank you so much for sharing your insights, and thank you for challenging that person, that man at the restaurant, and hopefully more women will feel empowered to do so, and be in places where it's safe enough for them to challenge men who come into our safe
it's
spaces.
a real thing, and we can't just shrink from it. We have to, if nobody, we have to look out for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, this sounds horrible, but the more incidents like what happened to you, the more things like that start happening, the more people will start saying, "Hey, wait a minute, these
Yeah,
aren't these poor people who are being bullied. They're the bullies."
yeah, definitely.